What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. And joining me today, Chris Fedor, cleveland.com Cavs beat reporter, and we're coming to you after the Cavs' latest loss, 118-116 to the Milwaukee Bucks in the second night of a back-to-back. And Chris, we knew coming into tonight's game that it was going to be a difficult one for this Cleveland Cavaliers team. They were going to be without Donovan Mitchell, who was dealing with a right groin strain. Then you had Evan Mobley resting for injury management. And also, the new news coming into tonight was James Harden. The team announced Wednesday afternoon that James Harden sustained a non-displaced fracture of the distal phalanx in his right thumb during Tuesday night's 109-94 win over the New York Knicks. James Harden was seen in the locker room after the game with a soft wrap covering the injured area, and that was the first indication that something wasn't right. A post-game examination by the Cavaliers medical staff, followed by x-rays taken on Wednesday ahead of the game against Milwaukee, confirmed the fracture. Obviously, we know James Harden will undergo treatment and continued evaluation. But before we get into the contest itself, Chris, I wanted to know if you had any insider information on the injury itself, how long James Harden could be, or if the Cavs could wait until after the next 4 games to then try and rest James Harden, because we know how critical those games could be to the standings of the Eastern Conference.
Ethan, I talked to 4 different players in the locker room after the game, and all of them thought James was going to play tonight. So they were kind of surprised that he didn't play, because he has built this reputation as a guy who continuously plays through injuries. He is very reliable. He's very durable. So when they got the news about 60 minutes before tip-off that James was going to be out, they were pretty surprised by it. But Jarrett Allen is the resident broken finger guy in this locker room, and he said the minute that he saw James's thumb, he knew that it was broken because it looked like Jarrett's finger, both fingers. So even if James is able to play through this, and there is some optimism that he's able to go Friday against Detroit, we'll see. If he's able to play through this, the question is, how's it going to affect him? How's it going to impact his ball handling? How's it going to impact his touch around the rim? How's it going to impact his passing? Because if you think about it, Jarrett Allen played through his broken fingers, but then he eventually had to get it shut down because catching a ball was painful, because he didn't have the same touch around the rim, because grabbing rebounds was painful as well. So nobody is going to ever question James Harden's toughness in any way. But seeing him in the locker room, he did have a black wrap around his thumb. There was clearly some protection on it. And it's just one of those things where you have to wait and see. I think part of it is pain tolerance. I think part of it is what is the medical staff comfortable with. I think part of it is how cautious do the Cavs want to be. Because there's 2 sides to this equation here, Ethan. He needs reps. This team needs time together to get a lot of things sorted out. James has been talking about it for the last week or so, that they need to use these regular season games kind of like practices, because the clock is ticking toward the end of the season, and they've got stuff that they still need to work through. Lineups, combinations, end of game situations, the pick and roll chemistry between James Harden and Evan Mobley. All of these different things are going to matter in the big picture. So part of the big picture is get these guys healthy, physically, mentally healthy going into the playoffs. But the other part of this big picture is get these answers that you need before the playoffs roll around. So you have 2 kind of competing thoughts here. For the most part, the Cavs, when there are injuries, they are cautious. But this is a little bit different just because of the timeline right now that they're in before the end of the season, and because this is a new player that they're still trying to get integrated to everything that they do, and they understand just how important he is going to be to their success. So I think if there's a way to play through it, and James can be effective and he doesn't feel like he can re-injure it, I think that's going to be the hope here. But again, I think we have to wait and see, um, because like I said, there was obviously a need for X-rays. There was obviously a reaction that players had in the locker room and that they saw his thumb and they were like, "Oh, geez, that doesn't look great." So when you have NBA players reacting that kind of way when they see the injury, you obviously have a little bit of pessimism attached to it. Um, but it does feel like, for the most part, very similar to the Jarrett Allen injury, where Jarrett said, I don't need surgery on this. Surgery is not going to help in any sort of way. Let me just try and play through this. I would not be surprised if that's how James approaches this too.
Not to try and be glass half full here, but even if there were to be a period where James Harden would miss, although, as Chris mentioned, it would be a little bit harder for the Cavs to get acclimated with him in the lineup and with the different rotations that they want to have set. I think it could also get him back into the level of conditioning that he might want to be in. Obviously, we've seen him. Chris mentioned it when they were in Denver doing stairs before a game, trying to get into a rhythm, trying to get back into the flow of the game, and obviously trying to figure out what game speed the Cavs want to play at. And obviously, James Harden plays to a little bit of a slower pace, maybe more methodical pace when it comes to playing in the half court rather than a fast tempo that the Cavs have been accustomed to this season. So I definitely think there is this push and pull. And there also could have just been the thought in the organization. I'm not saying this as a source told me this. I'm saying this as I'm thinking it. The Milwaukee Bucks might have been the opponent where the Cavs were like, I don't know if we need James Harden to win this game. And obviously, that ended up being the case because Dennis Schröder is unlikely to be the person with the ball in his hands in a playoff series with the clock winding down. But that does not take away from the overall performance of these rotation and role players who stepped up in the absence of these guys like James Harden, Evan Mobley, and Donovan Mitchell. So I want to get into the game itself briefly. So, Chris, as I mentioned, Dennis Schröder was great tonight. 26 points, 8 of 14, obviously taking on more of the offensive load without those main guys. 5 assists, which I thought was important. And then you have 5 other players who scored in double figures as well. Jalen Tyson, 14 points. Sam Merrill, 14 points. Keon Ellis, 14 points. Thomas Bryant, 11 points. What did you take away and what did you see from these role players, or what would you want to see more of in carrying this over into the next couple of games, which we know to be of extreme importance?
I think the most important thing that happened in tonight's game, Ethan, beyond anything else, is that Dennis Schröder stepped up and showed that if he's called on for starter minutes to play point guard, he can do it effectively. He can run the offense. He can organize. He got them in their sets. He got Jarrett Allen touches. He got everybody else involved. He was able to beat his own guy off the dribble, provide a scoring punch. And there is uncertainty when it comes to James, obviously. Um, Nobody knows if he's going to be able to play Friday against Detroit or this weekend against Brooklyn, or how effective he's going to be playing through this thumb injury, if he is going to try and play through the thumb injury. So this isn't a situation, it doesn't feel like a situation like earlier this year where when Darius Garland was on the roster and he was unavailable, the easiest answer, and maybe the only answer that the Cavs had, was, here you go, Donovan. More's on your plate. Here you go, Donovan. More responsibility to play make, to initiate, to create, to organize, to do all these different things. And it did feel like early in the season, because of the way that the roster was set up and because of the struggles of Lonzo Ball, the ineffectiveness of Lonzo Ball, and the sporadic play of Craig Porter Jr., in terms of his workload and what Kenny Atkinson was willing to give him at the beginning of the year, it did feel like the extra burden on Donovan wore on him. And it was taking a toll on him physically and mentally. And I just don't think at this point in the season, as March is getting closer and the playoffs are getting closer, I don't think there's any reason for the Cavs to want to put more on the plate of Donovan Mitchell right during a time where they feel like they're taking some of that off of him, where they feel like they're taking some of that responsibility away from him, where he's been unburdened because of the arrival of James Harden, Dennis Schröder, and Keon Ellis. So the Cavs have to be careful. And I think having somebody like Dennis, who Kenny Atkinson trusts, who Kenny Atkinson has been around for years, who Kenny Atkinson has said, throughout the course of Dennis's career, every single time some team, whether it's in Germany, Atlanta, Los Angeles, wherever it's been, whatever team it has been that needs Dennis to step up and step forward and do a little bit more, he's been able to answer that call. And he did that tonight. Now, I know it was against Milwaukee, but hey, Milwaukee is surging. They're 8-10. They're 8-2 in their last 10. So this isn't just like some pushover that is tanking, like the Utah Jazz or the Washington Wizards or something along those lines, right? This is a team that is surging, that is kind of like in the play-in picture. We'll see what happens at the end of the year with Milwaukee. But for Dennis to step forward and play as well as he did, that is a really, really good sign. And that means that for as long as James is going to be out, if he's not going to be the same James Harden that he was before the injury, then Kenny has somebody that, one, he trusts, and two, he knows he can go to because of his history and because of what he was able to do tonight against Milwaukee. So that allows the Cavs to not get into this mode like they were at the beginning of the season, where it was like, here you go, Donovan, here's some more. There's no reason for the Cavs, even if James is going to miss time, there's no reason for the Cavs to have that kind of mentality, because this is why you brought Dennis Schröder here. Yes, it's for his toughness. Yes, it's for his edginess. But he was insurance. He was depth. He was supposed to provide an added stability. And if injuries were going to continue to be a problem, then you had a starter quality point guard that could step in and fill those minutes in a pinch. And that's what he did tonight against Milwaukee. So I think it just gives the entire locker room confidence, and I think it gives Kenny Atkinson confidence that Dennis had the game that he did on the day that it was announced that James Harden had an X-ray on his busted thumb.
The other portion of this conversation delves into Jarrett Allen. Obviously, we understand how well he has played throughout the month of February. Jarrett Allen today against the Milwaukee Bucks in another situation where he had an added importance because of the lack of offensive construction without James Harden, Evan Mobley, and Donovan Mitchell. Jarrett Allen did not back away from the moment. Again, he had 27 points, 10 of 15 from the field, 11 rebounds, 7 of 8 from the free throw line. He had 2 steals, a block, and was extremely active defensively as well. He's been a player that the Cavs could rely on all month. And I think that goes into the conversation of, obviously, as we mentioned on a recent podcast, Black History Month, Jarrett Allen. But should Jarrett Allen legitimately be in the conversation for Eastern Conference Player of the Month for the month of February because of his performances over this stretch, and obviously the Cavs having a good record and getting a boost in the standings because of his play? Over 10 games in the month of February, Jarrett Allen is averaging 22 points and 11.8 rebounds per game. He also has the 5th best offensive rating among players who have played at least 20 minutes and at least 5 games in the month of February, with an offensive rating of 126.3. He has a net rating of 12.9. Ironically enough, the player above him directly, 4th on the offensive rating list for these criteria, is Sam Merrill, who has an offensive rating of 126.5 and a net rating of 16.4. But, Chris, that brings me to my question for you tonight, maybe my hardest hitting question. Do you think Jarrett Allen should win Player of the Month for the Eastern Conference for the month of February.
Definitely think he should be in the mix. I don't know that he should win it, though. Look, I think the thing that we have to understand when it comes to Jarrett is that his responsibility is a little bit different. And so for me, and I've said this all along, and it's how I view things, MVP, All-Stars, I'm always going to stay true to this thought. If you are the guy on your team and that's your role and that's your responsibility, I'm always going to provide more weight to that. And it's not taking away from anything that Jarrett Allen has done in the month of February. He's been great. He was great before James Harden got here, and he became even better, and his production became more sustainable playing alongside James because there was somebody that was going to continue to get him the ball. There was somebody who was going to open up opportunities for him. There was somebody who was going to just command a level of attention from the defense that was going to lead to Jarrett and some of these other guys being more afterthoughts. And like, that's the point that I'm trying to make. If you're talking about Jaylen Brown, yeah, Peyton Pritchard is there. Yeah, Derek White is there. But that's the top name on the scouting report every single time you play against the Celtics, right? When Joel Embiid is not playing for the 76ers, it's Tyrese Maxey's show. And Philadelphia's success is going to be dictated by what he does, how he plays. So with guys like that, I'll always give them a little bit more weight. Like I said, it's not taking anything away from Jarrett, but we have to have an understanding that everything for him is made easier by the fact that he does share the floor with Donovan Mitchell, that he does share the floor with James Harden, that those two guys make things easier on Jarrett. Those two guys set him up in a different kind of way. I mean, think about the attention that Donovan gets. Think about the attention that James gets. There are times that teams are sending two at James Harden and Donovan Mitchell. Who's going to be the beneficiary of that? Well, Sam Merrill in some cases, Jarrett Allen in some cases, Evan Mobley in some cases. So, I mean, I'd really have to study like who has had the best month in the Eastern Conference. But if things are close between Jarrett and Jaylen Brown, or if things are close between Jarrett and Tyrese Maxey, or things are close between Jarrett and Cade Cunningham, or things are close between Jarrett and Jalen Brunson, I'm always going to wait a little bit more to those other guys.
I think that's fair. And obviously, tonight was only the second to last game that Jarrett Allen has in the month of February to put on his showcase. Over the entire month, he's averaging 22 points, as I mentioned, but on 73.1% from the field. He's been phenomenal. And every aspect of the game, obviously, we want to see more of the rebounding, that continuation. But I think the next game could really make or break when it comes to this conversation. You brought up Cade Cunningham. The Cavs' next stop, the next matchup is Detroit. In Detroit, against Cade, against Jalen Duren. All these guys that are physical, that like to play tough. Asar Thompson, who likes to get on the boards. Chris, what are you expecting to carry over when it comes to this Cavs team potentially, hopefully having both Donovan and Evan available, uncertain about James Harden? And what is the biggest area of concern for you when it comes to Friday night's game against the Pistons?
I think Kenny Atkinson will say it pregame Friday night. It's playing with a level of physicality is matching the physicality of the Pistons. Kenny was talking the other night in the win against the Knicks, how the Cavs fought for their spots on the offensive end of the floor. They didn't allow the physicality of the Knicks to get them out of rhythm offensively. They didn't allow the Knicks to dictate terms. They didn't allow the Knicks to hit first. If you go back to this weekend against Oklahoma City's tenacity, Oklahoma City's aggressiveness, Oklahoma City's handsiness, it took the Cavs out of their game. It put the Cavs on their heels. And everybody inside the organization admitted that. And if you looked at the beginning of the game with the 10 turnovers, yeah, some of those were self-inflicted, right? But a big part of that was the pressure of Oklahoma City and the mental strain that they put on you because of their relentless style. Detroit's the same kind of way. They're not Oklahoma City, but they're the same kind of team, and they succeed the same kinds of ways, and they get under your skin the same kinds of ways, and they force turnovers, and they grab you, and they hit you on every single movement. Sam Merrill's got to be prepared to get his jersey tugged, get his arm grabbed, get bumped when he goes around these screens and things like that. Whoever's playing point guard has to be ready to get nudged coming off these screens, and getting pushed from behind and stuff like that. Because that's who Detroit is. That's the identity that they have set. So I think anytime you're playing against a team like that, and the Cavs have this reputation, this nagging one that has followed them like a haunting shadow for the last 2.5, 3 years, you do have something to prove when it comes to how do you handle physicality? Are you able to dictate terms? Are you able to keep your offensive rhythm? Are you able to still do the things that make you a successful basketball team? Those are the things that I think you have to pay attention to. The other thing that I think is really, really important that you want to pay attention to is who gets the Cade matchup. Because if you're talking about a 7-game series, who gets that matchup? And what kind of success are the Cavs going to have in that matchup? Can they neutralize Cade the same way that they neutralized Jalen Brunson? Saw what happened to the Knicks offense with Jalen Brunson being hounded by Dean Wade and Dennis Schröder and whoever else was going to guard Brunson the other night. That was a total team effort. It was led by Dean, who, by the way, is the Brunson stopper. According to NBA.com matchup data, Jalen Brunson has scored 6 total points while matched up with Dean Wade in 3 meetings between the two teams. And he's 1 of 15 from the field and 0 of 6 from 3-point range. And you saw the Knicks, one of the best offenses in the NBA, not having enough other solutions. Jalen Brunson was hunting switches. And then he kept running into these situations where it's like, damn, Darius isn't out there anymore. Like, who am I going to pick on? Like, where do I go? What's the advantageous matchup for me? And it's going to be the same thing with Cade. They're going to run a ton of pick and roll. The Cavs are going to switch a bunch of stuff. Can Jalen Tyson hold his own against Cade? Can Dennis Schröder get under his skin? Can, if James Harden is going to be playing in this matchup, can he hold up in switches against some of the burlier bigs the way that he did against the Knicks? So all those different things I think are significant, but the two things are how do you handle physicality and then who gets the Cade matchup and how effective can that person be in the Cade matchup?
Chris, I think one of those goes hand in hand with rebounding. The physicality portion of that goes hand in hand with rebounding because we understand what the Cavs have lacked this season, how they've struggled on the defensive rebounding aspect of the floor. The Detroit Pistons average the 3rd most offensive rebounds in the league, and they're the 2nd best defensive rated team in the entire NBA. So we're seeing all of the different matchups that the Cavs have needed to kind of understand what they're going to have to face in the playoffs in this stretch. You mentioned it. New York being one of the best offensive teams. All right, you handled that test. Now you're going to have to handle the opposite of that, the defensive end of the floor. How are you going to react? And then obviously, we've talked about Dean Wade being the Jalen Brunson stopper. Dean Wade has also had the assignment at multiple different occasions throughout his career of guarding Cade Cunningham. And I wrote about it for today and kind of called out the fan base a little bit, Chris, on how they've kind of been surprised about Dean Wade. Whether or not they listen to the podcast, you would know of how he continues to impact winning, even though the box score might not say what he does is impactful. You don't see the offensive metrics. You don't see the offensive numbers. But he's a defensive advanced metrics darling. I mentioned earlier Jarrett Allen being one of the best offensive rated players in the month of February. But Dean Wade is right below him, 126.1 offensive rating. And get this, Chris, the net rating with Dean Wade on the floor for the month of February per 100 possessions, 22.6. That's better than Sam Merrill. That's better than Jarrett Allen. And it's because the defensive area of the floor is completely flipped when Dean Wade is out there. And we understand that he still is taking on some of the more difficult matchups each given night. So, yes, I do think it'll be a test for Dean Wade again to continue to showcase what he's capable of. But then, how does the rest of the group work in switches? It's not Jalen Brunson, and obviously he's physical, but he's smaller than Cade Cunningham. Jalen Tyson, how are you going to wall up? Dennis Schröder, are you going to be able to bother him for 94 feet against that kind of pressure? Obviously, we saw it against Jalen Brunson in the paint where he tried to shoulder bump Dennis about 4 times, and Dennis just stood there and took it. But again, there's a different level of physicality that Cade Cunningham is willing and able to play with because of his size, because of his weight, because of his stature. And obviously, we've seen it in the Charlotte Hornets game when they got physical, and we've continued to see it with the Detroit Pistons, where they are willing and going to try and impose their will both physically and mentally on a team, especially a team like the Cavs that still hasn't evaded this notion of being soft. But that can only truly be proven in a playoff series. And I think the Cavs are kind of looking at this stretch of games as that, as going up against opponents, learning who they are, learning what they can take away from each matchup, and then continuing to build because we're continuing to see how much the Cavs and Kenny Atkinson are changing rotations, are changing lineups, are changing combinations, and trying to figure out what fits and what works best, especially heading into a potential playoff series against one of these teams that they're facing in the next week and a half.
The other thing that I would say, Ethan, before we get out of here is that the Cavs have to continue to give Jarrett an opportunity, even in difficult matchups. Going into the game against Detroit, everybody knows what Jalen Duren's capable of. Everybody knows what Isaiah Stewart is capable of. But give Jarrett a chance. See if he can create advantages a different kind of way. He's not going to be as physical as those guys. That's just not how he's made. But can he use his footwork? Can he use his speed? Can he use his skill? Can he do other things to create advantages for his team? And I think they have to give him that opportunity to do that. They have to let him get involved in the offense. They have to let him touch the ball. Because the other thing that we have seen with Jarrett, and I think it's like this with a lot of bigs around the NBA, but when he's more involved offensively, he's more engaged defensively. When he's more involved offensively, he's more engaged when it comes to boxing out, getting rebounds, playing with force and physicality underneath. And I thought even on a night in this game against Milwaukee, even on a night where James Harden wasn't there was still a clear emphasis of, hey, we know your pick and roll partner is not here, but we got to get you involved. We got to let you get into the flow of the game. We got to let you touch the ball. Now, his first basket was an offensive rebound putback, and that was him doing that work himself. But as the first quarter continued to progress, Dennis Schröder, the veteran point guard that he is, he was looking for Jarrett Allen. So it's a tough matchup against Detroit. Everybody understands that they want to win the paint. That's usually their pathway to success because they're not a prolific three-point shooting team and because they don't have secondary shot creation aside from Cade. So they have to go about it a different kind of way. And JB Bickerstaff believes win the paint and you're going to have a fighting chance. So even though that is the strength of Detroit, you still can't just go away from Jarrett and say, we're not going to test that. We're not going to get him involved. We're going to take a bunch of threes, or we're going to do all these different things in our offense that we think is more advantageous for us. Because Jarrett has become a force for this team. He has become a weapon for this team. He has become a pathway to consistent offense for this team. And just because Detroit has the reputation that it does, and just because they are really, really good when it comes to protecting the paint and winning the paint, they still have to go into Friday night's game saying, you know what, Jarrett, we're going to give you a chance. We're going to give you a chance the same way that we did against Milwaukee. We're going to give you a chance the same way that we did against the New York Knicks.
The last thing I'm going to say before we get out of here, Chris, is you mentioned it, the three-point shot for the Pistons. They're 22nd in the NBA in three-point percentage. Obviously, the Cavs are still one of the worst teams when it comes to guarding the three-point line in the NBA. Yet another game tonight where the opponent shot more than 40 three-point attempts. They were 42.2%. Milwaukee was on Wednesday night in the win. So when we talk about JB Bickerstaff, and we've known him pretty well, he's a little hard-headed. So he doesn't necessarily want to change his philosophy game to game. He wants to impose his will, kind of enforcing the dynamic of what his team has become. So I'd be interested to see, obviously, adding in Kevin Huerter, Duncan Robinson, and knowing that the Cavs are not a well-rounded three-point defense team, whether or not that becomes a principle for him in this specific matchup where they try to attack these other defenders. Obviously, Dennis Schröder, Keon Ellis, Jalen Tyson, getting them in actions and getting them away, and obviously also pulling Jarrett Allen away from the basket and trying to get him in actions as well on the defensive end. I think it's going to be important to see if the Detroit Pistons can make threes early and how that changes the principles and the dynamic of both teams, whether that's the Cavs and how they continue to guard on that end of the floor, or the Pistons and what area they determine to attack. Because we know, as Chris mentioned, they love the painted area on both ends of the floor. But if they can find an advantageous matchup, J.B. Bickerstaff and Cade Cunningham are more than willing to attack that again and again and again. And we continue to see other players. Obviously, Jenkins is a guy that can snipe. They have players off the bench that could be utilized depending on how they want to see their three-point usage increase. So I think it'll be interesting. Obviously, this is a matchup that we've been wanting to see. And Detroit might not be fully healthy. The Cavs might not be fully healthy. That's why this is kind of like a preliminary matchup before March 3rd, when the Cavs and the Pistons could be fully healthy. But we'll have to wait till then to break that all down. With all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. This is where you can send in your weekly Hey Chris questions. We're going to handle that tomorrow ahead of the game on Friday. So sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word stop. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.